Okay, gracias. Buenos días. It's a great pleasure to be here with you back in Orlando for a conference. I have to say that Centro has served as a convener, as a place where we can actually discuss ideas, discuss policy options for Puerto Rico, talk about strategies to be more effective in solidarity with Puerto Rico. In that regard, you have to balance those two sides, the academic and the engagement. This is engagement. This is about sharing ideas, but the academic is very important. So one of the things that we've done on the academic side is to produce a journal. I'm going to say a few more words about that. But on the engagement side, the conferences are very important, and I'm going to spend some time talking about the digital platform that we have created and the whole role of technology in the Puerto Rican community today, which I think it's oftentimes not talked about enough, right? And I'm going to explain why it is that it's our sort of Trojan horse to organize nationally the Puerto Rican community. So I'll speak a bit more about that as we move along. And moving forward, Centro has put together a research group that is going to focus on socioeconomic impacts in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora. I'm going to present some data about that as we move forward. But we also have some forthcoming issues of the journal. We just published one on the crisis in Puerto Rico. I'll present more about that in a second. But we're also moving forward. We have a few more journals that special issues of the journals that we would like to share with you and invite you to be part of that effort. And we also have organized a lot of conferences in Puerto Rico, but there's one very special one that is trying to engage our youth, college students, at the national level, and it's all starting here in Florida. Florida has a lot of impetus to share with the rest of us. So moving forward, the Centro has produced a lot of documentation of what's going on in Puerto Rico. You have some of it there. But I like to encourage you to first subscribe to our newsletter. We have a bunch of mechanisms to convey the information. We have a newsletter. The briefs are put almost daily, newsletters and information about what's happening in Puerto Rico and what's happening in the diaspora. There is one on small business communities. Florida is at the vanguard of all that. We're going to, as soon as we get the most recent numbers, we're going to put it out. So those are examples of the outreach that we're trying to weave around the nation, around things that happen all Puerto Rico. And now I want to take a few minutes to talk about our last issue, trying to understand the crisis in Puerto Rico, okay? And remember, we're nonpartisan. This is all baseline information, okay? Si te gusta bien, y si no te gusta también. And you know why? Because, someone has to be in charge of putting information out that is not intended to be partisan or sort of utilitarian to any particular view of what's happening in Puerto Rico. And that balance is difficult because we ourselves are biased. We have our own views, right? But when we act as academics, we have to put aside those biases and try to be as balanced as possible, okay? And that's what we try to do with this issue of the crisis. It's available. I think we have some copies around. You can also order it via email and whatever. But Carlos and I are going nationally doing conferences. I've done already about 15 or 20 classroom presentations and a couple of, town halls in campuses. So contact us and we'll try to figure something with you. But the fact about Puerto Rico is that everybody thinks to focus on the fiscal crisis or the economic crisis. The reality is that Puerto Rico is immersed in crisis, in plural, okay? Because that problem with the economy, right, that we all know about, resulted in the fiscal deficits and that led to the debt borrowing and eventually to the debt crisis, which in turn cut services and is aggravating poverty in Puerto Rico and the humanitarian crisis. The Exodus alone is evidence, proof number one, that we are immersed in a humanitarian crisis, because it's not normal that you lose 1 million people over a decade. It's just not normal. In a group of 5 or 6 million inhabitants, that as you move forward in a couple of decades, you lose so many people, it's not normal. We shouldn't accept that that's the fact of life. It is not. The fact that we have to relocate to Florida and what have you. And more importantly, all of that is resulting in a political crisis. And Promesa itself is evidence number one, that we are in the midst of a political conflict that needs to be resolved at some point. Okay, probably not today, but at some point. So here's part of what we do in this issue of the journal is to describe the history of the economic crisis and what it goes. This picture speaks of 1,000 words, okay? This is the gross domestic product, a proxy for the gross domestic product, and it just tells you that the solution of the 1970s, which was Section 936, pushed the economy up to the peak that you see there. I do have, okay. So this is the crisis here, the oil crisis, right? And then 936 is enacted in 1976. And look what happened in the economy. A few years after, pharmaceuticals start opening, and the economy start going up and up and up. It was doing so well, right, that Congress figured, hey, too many $1 billion are going to the pharmaceuticals and high-tech companies that are in Puerto Rico, right? And then it got entangled somewhat into the status issue, and all of a sudden, the Clinton administration phased out 936. So this is the year in which Section 936 ended. And the story about that is very straightforward. Whether you believe there is a correlation or not, those are the facts, okay? Now, what substituted Section 936 in Puerto Rico? Nothing of what we needed. What we did do was to borrow money to try to compensate for the loss of employments in the island. And that borrowing, hey, here we are. And this is what happened when Hurricane Maria hit, right? We were at the same level that we started with in 1980. Isn't that remarkable? That, I don't know, 40 years later, we're exactly where we started. That's what the economy of Puerto Rico is, and that's where we are in the midst of where we are. Now, moving forward, this is what happens with the debt in Puerto Rico. This is the period where we decided between these two lines, right? This is the total debt. Between these two lines, okay, what is the difference here? That this is public corporation borrowing. This is when we started el tren urbano. We started expanding highways and charging tolls. We're expanding all this, there was this, you know, when the Partido Popular won, we created industrial development through factories and other type of government investment. And we created over 80 public enterprises. And then we decided, when they eliminated 936, that what we needed to do was to expand those public corporations, right? And what happens is that required borrowing. And borrowing requires paying back. And to pay back, you need to generate revenues. But the projects, the Coliseo, el Centro de Convenciones, el Tren Urbano, they don't generate enough revenues to pay the debt. So this is what happened. You accumulate. And then when we run out of borrowing capacity in 2006, they had the brilliant idea of creating more taxes. And they created COFINA, which is a sales tax that started at 7.5% and today is 11%. And we have, estamos orgullosos que somos el estado o el territorio que más alto taxes paga en toda la nación. We're proud of that. 11%, go figure that one. And what happens is that they couldn't expand this borrowing that much, but they created this new tax. And here we are, 2014, in the midst of the crisis. So I'm an economist. I'm not going to bother you with all this stuff. I have to say that $74 billion in debt is not enough. We borrow by not paying pensions. We borrow from pensioners another $50 billion. And you know what happened to the pensioners in Puerto Rico, the government employees? They eliminated the pensions. Now it's pay as you go. So they had no reserve. They ate all the reserve from the pensioners. So we owe more than $120 billion in debt. That's where we are today. Now, I don't want to be doomsday here. I didn't create this problem. Okay, take a break. breathe deep. I'm going to get to the good part in a minute, right? But anyway, so, and then Congress realized we have a problem, right? So we had a debt crisis, and you have out-of-control local politicians borrowing money and not having capacity to pay. So they came up with a solution. I'm going to let you restructure your debt, but you're going to be on their oversight board that control your finances. Simple. I will actually say it's brilliant. Why? The politicians in Puerto Rico hate it, right? But someone has to be the adult in the room and control the expenses. Now, that sounds like colonialism. And you know why? Because it is, right? But this is what we are. We have a political elite that's been incapable of governing that country for so long. And now we have the promise that we're going to get out of that with that dual restructuring of the debt and fiscal control. It's too early to say. I will not spend too much time on that. But when the board was created, look at the board was created, the opinion polls were pretty much even. A lot of people didn't know. This is what 80% of people saying, I don't know about. And eventually, the approval rate for Promesa and what Congress did went up. And you figure, what's going on? All I hear is protest. But the public opinion was, why? Because people in Puerto Rico were hopeful that something was being done to solve the problem. And more importantly, that opinion poll also say that the three top institutions that Puerto Ricans supported were the federal court, Congress, go figure that one, and the FBI. And they didn't trust Puerto Rican courts, and they didn't trust the political law enforcement things, and that's what is reflected here. And that's why Romero Barceló was elected around here. I'm sorry. I go way too back, okay. Ricky Rosselló was elected. I mean, I'm not going to get into, I apologize. I get all that mixed up. But anyway, but then, you know, he was elected. He was the one that aligned the best with the Oversight Board, and he was elected on that basis. I can work with them. But guess what? When they started telling you got to cut the budget, and there's going to be austerity, and, you know, and by the way, we're going to cut 1/3 of the budget for UPR, and the students came out, whoops, what happened to public opinion? And this is where we are today. That if we trusted the American institutions to solve our problem, public opinion tells us we don't trust the local institutions, and now we don't trust the American institutions. Who do we trust? Hey, we got to trust ourselves. But anyway, but this is what Promesa did for you, okay? This is the level that we would have paid 10 years after the enactment of Promesa, right? If we were to pay the bonds that we borrow money for. This is the level, $3.5 billion on average, without debt restructuring. And this is what they expect to pay, about 20 cents on the dollar, after Promesa. So whether you like Promesa or not, okay? Now, this is covering, remember, for the bad borrowing that Puerto Rican politicians did. Don't be misunderstood, you know, and we're all paying. The bondholders are paying. The retirees in Puerto Rico are paying. Everybody's paying except the people that got us into this mess. Those people are still being elected and are still running for office, and I should stop right here. But the point is that whether you like Promesa or not, it's bringing you an opportunity to restructure your economy. Es caldo malo, pero para el catarro bueno, right? And in any case, I'm not going to defend anybody about this. But everything said and done, these are the two projections from the Oversight Board from the fiscal plan before Maria and the fiscal plan after Maria. So before Maria, the hope for Puerto Rico, oops, how do I get back here? Oh, I can speak without a slide. Okay, so it's true. Before Maria, this is the projection before Maria. This is the Fiscal Oversight Board own projections. I'm not making this up. So this was the prospect that after 10 years of Promesa, Remember the bitter medicine that they said we needed to take? At best, your economy was going to grow at about 2%. This was before Maria. Then Maria came, and presumably we're going to get an injection of capital to solve the Puerto Rican economy problems, right? But after 10 years, the best they promise us is a rate of growth of the GDP that is below zero, about negative 1%. These are the most recent projections. So after everything is said and done, after so much suffering of the Puerto Rican people, this is the best we can do? This is what they project for us. Okay, it's not the end of the story. I said doomsdays are going to change. I don't know how, but anyway. So moving forward, there are 4 scenarios, and we don't expand too much on this, but if you invite me to give a talk, I'll be happy as long as there is no recording to expand on those. But I have to say that there are 4 things that are promising to us. Obviously, the first one is that we have the capacity to encourage Congress to be more proactive in investment in Puerto Rico. And I mean both the recovery, economic recovery, which is entangled now in politics, as you all know. We need to overcome that, right? And we're in a situation in the diaspora that we can influence that process through our elected officials. But more importantly, that if we're American citizens in Puerto Rico, right, we should have the same rights as other American citizens. And what that means is, whether your political preferences are one or the other, that means for me that if you have Medicaid in Puerto Rico, we should be having Medicaid at the same rates that other states and territories have. We shouldn't be capped, and it should be expanded. There's no reason why the earned income tax credit shouldn't be in Puerto Rico. There's no reason why the child tax credit is capped. It's said that only applies to families with more than 3 kids. Those are basic stuff, and if they were to do that, we will create a baseline of economic development that will allow the rest of the economy to recover. So what I'm saying is that just like Congress pulled out the 936, they can pull in equality for Puerto Rican citizens in the island. Because if you're in New York, you have all these rights. If you're in Florida, you have all these rights. If you move back to Puerto Rico, you lose those rights. So there's something wrong with that. Whether you're for statehood or not, whether you're for this or that, as long as we are American citizens, we should be entitled to the same benefits that any other citizen has, right? And I don't mean to start a debate about the status. Now, the second point is that the civic engagement in Reconstruction is in our hands, okay? We don't have the civic capacity right now, but we can change that. And what I mean by that is that the solidarity movement here in the diaspora needs to start looking at specific ways in which we can support the civic sector in Puerto Rico. Why? Because if we create the capacity, if we institute social enterprise, the use of federal funding to build capacity in Puerto Rico, we will be doing 2 or 3 things at the same time. The first one is that once you build the affordable housing, right, or you build the schools, they're there. No one cares if that came through a loan from the federal government or what. It's there. You're solving the problem. The social purpose is achieved, right? And we have the opportunity of using federal funding to do that. But Puerto Rico is not behaving the way it should in terms of engaging the civic capacity of the people down there to engage in the process. We need to support that process. But more importantly, if you build that capacity, there will be a realignment of political forces, because those people, right, once they build the enterprise, they tend to have, more accountability to government institutions. They tend to be more independent of government institutions, and you're creating a leadership class that will transcend the current political situation in Puerto Rico. So I think it's beneficial on both sides. But the other point is, and Carlos has an article in the special issue of the Journal, where he dissects the whole question of the advent of the independent vote in Puerto Rico. It was 17% for governor last time. The current governor won by less than 3% in difference. So think about that. And about 50% of the people did not go out to vote in protest when our participation rates were 85% and above. So there's something going on in Puerto Rico at the political level that says that we're in a new situation that requires our understanding. Research, hint, hint, research. We need to understand it. And finally, I think we can make a huge difference, the diaspora movement with respect to Puerto Rico, because we elect local people. We elect Darren Soto. We got to go to Darren. We got to go to Torres. We got to go to our elected officials and say, hey, this is what I stand, and we may not agree on everything we stand for, but let's try to agree on Puerto Rico. Hey, where is the funding for Puerto Rico? What's happening with this administration as withholding the money? Okay, why is it that we don't have earned income tax credit? Why is it that we don't have Medicaid party? Why is it that we have to come for food stamps every year to you, for food stamps, for the poor? I don't think that's fair, but anyway, that's my opinion. So all of that is happening in Puerto Rico is reshaping the diaspora, and that's the point of this conference. Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans. Whatever happens there reshapes who we are, what we do in the diaspora. It also gives us an opportunity because of, now you are in Florida. Every politician that wants to be elected for whatever purposes in Florida have to pay attention to the Puerto Ricans now. So we have an agenda, and the more unitary we are, the more they're going to listen. And by the way, we need people in both parties. Okay? Don't think that this is, no, we need people in both parties. And then the people in both parties need to talk to each other about what the agenda is here, and we need to go as one people to claim for those rights that we're defending. Now, I'm going to talk now about the consequences of the diaspora very quickly. This is how migration looks, okay? And this is migration, the great migration, so to speak, that brought so many people, about 600,000 people in one decade to the Northeast in Puerto Rico. This is the data. This is the data we have available to us. These are different measures of how we measure migration, but they all go in the same direction. But guess what happens in the new millennium? This is the new millennial migration. Okay, it's deeper. We already have more people leaving Puerto Rico than in the so-called Great Migration. It's deeper, but guess what? We haven't finished yet. Okay, we haven't finished yet, and this is what's happening. This is the population of Puerto Ricans in the diaspora in the United States, and this is the population of Puerto Rico. We started about the same level back in the early 2000s. But this is what's happening since the onset of the economic crisis, right? And that gap, Maria did accelerate a little bit the exodus, but it didn't create the exodus. This gap was growing as we spoke, right? As the onset of the economic crisis, it just accelerated a little bit more, right? And this is where we are. Now, so I'm going to go flying now because I know I'm running into my timeline. Thanks for the extra time. So anyway, right a couple of weeks after Maria, people started calling Centro, from day one. Where do we send money? What do they need? So we created, the first thing that we created was the so-called where to donate. Then people started asking where to volunteer. A month later, we have created this website that has all these tabs, where to get help when you arrive to the United States, understanding policies to Puerto Rico, the events that were going on in Solidarity, and that gave birth to Rebuild Puerto Rico, which is a digital platform where we hope people can get information about everything. But something happened. The Puerto Rico partners started asking us for more. Usted le da un poquito, ellos quieren más todavía, right? So they asked us to create, help them with community planning and with bringing the Puerto Ricans to Puerto Rico. And we did. We started talking to them. And then we expanded to 3 new tabs, one of which is an exchange of students. And, Martha is here. She's taking students 3 times to Puerto Rico from Gainesville. And other people are taking students and faculty to work down there. But I think the important things that we created was a database that we're going to probably bring to Florida. We started some workshops yesterday, but we're going to bring to Florida more forceful as we move along. But we started using GIS for community planning in Puerto Rico. Okay, I don't know how many of you know what GIS is, but it's on the social science side. It's about gathering data, putting it all in a repository, and then visualizing it as maps, right? And it has a lot of applications. But one of the applications that is relevant for Florida is that we are creating layers. Layers are the data that you represent geographically. We're creating layers for the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goals are international measure of progress, social progress, and humanities progress, right? In education, in housing, in all of those things. So if you want to track how are Puerto Ricans doing in Florida versus how Puerto Ricans are doing in Puerto Rico, you can do it through this data set that we're creating. And it allows you to visualize that. But more importantly, we created a group to understand, right, what factors lead to changes in these indicators. So it's all about understanding. Let me move quickly through this. We're using that in Puerto Rico to evaluate the outcomes of the reconstruction. So we're looking at CBGDR goals, we're looking at the government plan, and through this, with community groups, we will be able to assert, as we move forward in years to come, what progress we've made in these various places, areas, like housing, or health, or resiliency, and other things that are measured by these layers. So when you go to our website, right now we have 2 maps. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of them. But suffice to say, we're going to create one for Florida. That's part of the feedback that we're getting with this, organizing this conference. And we're going to do one for New York. We're going to try to decompose this a little bit more. But as you go to the Puerto Rico map, for example, you can then look at Puerto Rico has almost 20% of the units of housing are vacant. So we did a whole report on that. Some of you may have it in your packages there. But so you can represent all the data that you see in our documents. You can replicate with our application here. So this is a sort of the intensity of housing vacancies, and obviously areas where you have more housing, you have more vacancies. That's important for community planning purposes. As an example, you can also look at simulations where you look at where schools are closed, schools are open, what they're going to close next year. So from a community perspective, you can also put the nonprofits in there, and you can say, okay, basically the conclusion from this analysis is they're closing the schools in the countryside. So we have a problem in the countryside. You're abandoning the countryside. What's going to happen to agriculture? If families have to move from the country because they don't have schools, who's going to do agriculture in Puerto Rico? So that's the kind of analysis that you can do there. We're also using it for community planning. So this is an exercise that we planners do. And I wanted to look at planning from a perspective of a water region, right? La Plata nace en Guayama, pero muere en Dorado. And along the way, they flooded every town in its way. So what do, right? You got to clean up here. You got to do bamboo things there. That's what Martha students do. But in any case, I wanted to do this exercise and look at what happens in this town. I'm just going to give you a glimpse of what you'd use this GIS for. So now you can see where the vacancies are, where the flood damage is. And for community planning purposes, this is a great tool. We now added vacancies so that you know where you can move people, where the flooded areas are. Anyway, we don't have time to go into too much detail, but that's the kind of things that you want to partner with people in Puerto Rico to train them to do community visioning. What is it that we want to do in Puerto Rico? So this is the other map. Now we're going to zoom in Florida in a minute. But this is running. Right now you can go there and look at all the Puerto Rican organizations. You can look at all the Hispanic organizations servicing in Puerto Rican communities. You can have the Puerto Rican population. You can have the school-age population. You can play with this data as you see fit for community planning purposes. So if you're a nonprofit and you need to do reports to request funding, this is how you get your data to do all of this. So one example is we decided to map to show you the Puerto Rican organizations and leaders. And that's a representation of the Puerto Rican Day Parades and Festival. We have Puerto Ricans know how to party, okay? we may not know a lot about economic development, but party, that we know. We know very well. Thank you very much. So we wanted to know where our infrastructure for cultural activism, Florida doesn't have enough. So that's one finding from here. We need more party in Florida. Okay. Anyway, here we are looking at elected officials. Again, These numbers haven't been updated for this slide. We did update them for yesterday, but this is an old slide. But we update this after every election. So you have the most recent information, and it's at your fingertips. By the way, any information that you see in the map, you can download in an Excel file or use for tables and do for whatever. Hey, hint, research, right? Anyway, so you have all the Puerto Rican nonprofits. You have all the Hispanic nonprofit servicing in Puerto Rican communities. We did this for Florida yesterday. We had a seminar with Jennifer Hinojosa. Where's Jennifer? There, right. She's the wizard of GIS, and if you have any questions, raise your hand again so people can bother you with questions, okay? So she can do maps for you in partnership with you and so forth. So this one is about population, where are they by zip codes. You can do the data by counties or zip codes or what have you. You can, actually this is a slightly different view, but it has, you can choose, if you want to do like a movie, you can choose layers and then map the growth of the community because you have all these years available to you. And all of that is in the dashboard. So those of you who are into research, this is very easy to navigate. This is now, we go to slides that Carlos has for Puerto Rican voting population, where the elected officials are, and you can make those correlations. Where are the gaps in elected officials, right, from our population in Florida? You can do all that with this data. But that's not all we do. That's on the social sciences and community planning and whatever. We also have resources available for those of you who are on the qualitative side of research. And we spent some time yesterday training people on a couple of things, one of which was digital humanities. For those of you who are not familiar with that, it's anything that relates to human conditions, whether history, whether oral histories, whether photograph, whether art, all of that we have in digital form in our website. And you can filter all that data by Florida, by Orlando, by any geography that you want. You can use any sort of keywords that you want to access that information. But the digital humanities at Centro, I mean, we did like a 1-hour workshop yesterday. It's not that hard to learn, but you can save your data. You can do visual presentations if you're a teacher, and you can learn more about your community. A little quick go around is there's a whole stuff on oral histories. There are, here you can see where to find information. This is our landing page for digital collections. We also have a Centro e-journal. If anyone here wants to do an exhibit on Florida, we collaborate with you and put it online there. We also have a very important program for us, which is about teaching our youth, especially, about their heritage. It's called the Puerto Rican Cultural Ambassador Program. It's online. It can be used by teachers. It can be used by yourself. We have a junior program for you to teach your children, and we have some materials to do that. So it's a very neat program. We have a bunch of, this is Tato Laviera's forthcoming documentary on the New York poet. We have, Clemente Soto Vélez, Pura Belpré, Fran Bonilla. So we take, this is Pura Belpré teaching kids using puppetry. So we take pioneros. We have also a TV show that highlights some of the contemporary people making a difference, and we put them into the Cultural Ambassador Program. So right now we have 4 courses. In next year, we're probably going to launch 2 or 3 more. You have one on Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, where's Puerto Rico? Oh, it's forthcoming, actually. So we have one on the history of Puerto Ricans in the U.S. We have one on the culture. We have, this is on socioeconomic conditions here in the States, and we have a Cultural Ambassador Junior, and the Puerto Rico course is forthcoming. I thought it was here already, but it's not. So in any case, I know I have extended my welcome here. Carlos is telling me that, hold your horses. So some final thoughts is, I hope that I've enticed your appetite for a bigger role for understanding, for research, that you start partnering more with our our UCF partners here with Fernando and the Puerto Rico Research Hub. But I also hope that you follow us, that you find information about your community. We're open for business. You can invite us to do a lot of things. And I hope that all we're doing here is contributing a little bit for that solidarity movement that is so important for Puerto Rico. And as we help them, we're helping ourselves to organize, to be more understanding, to be more unitary, to be more in tune with each other and what the priorities should be for our community. So thank you so much. Para los de aquí, para los de allá.